Hate is a strong word, but if there's one person I genuinely hate, it's UFC president Dana White. In one of my recent videos, I called Dana White a modern day slave master, and there was loads of people in the comments saying, oh, you've gone too far. And I'm like, well, just give me a minute to show you why Dana White is one of the worst people in the world. I'm not even going to focus on the fact that he's just been caught slapping his wife in public, and then a week later has released a promo for his new slap fighting division. I'm not going to focus on the way he bullies acclaimed journalist Ariel Helwani for holding him to account.
He's one of the slimiest, scummiest that you will ever come across.
Yeah, I can't wait for this to get clipped out and go onto Instagram, you know.
I want to talk about how some of the most deadly fighters on the planet are terrified of speaking out against them. A lot of UFC fighters are struggling to survive, but they're scared to speak out.
Take your time. I know it does, man. I know how much you put into this, and you're going to move the kids to New Mexico now after this fight. You got the win bonus and everything else, but...
You know, I want to move my family, and I needed to win to move my family. And, you know, we packed up in 3 days and drove 24 hours and spent 3 weeks at Jackson Wink, and we got it done. And, man, it's an amazing feeling to be back in Wick, Colin. I know I'm crying. I'm always crying on TV, but, man, it's just like a weight's lifted off my shoulders, especially when you're the breadwinner in the family. So it feels so good.
The fighters only get paid 20% of the revenue that they generate, and the majority of the money goes into the pocket of Dana and the shareholders who've never had to take a punch in their life. In 2016, the UFC sold for $4 billion, 400 million of which went straight to Dana. Dana takes the money that the fighters generate and blows it all on, well, I'll let Bender from Futurama explain.
With blackjack and hookers!
There's this infamous clip where UFC fighter Colby Covington approaches Dana after a UFC event, and he inadvertently catches him sitting next to at a poker table.
Dana, what's up, bro? How you doing? How you doing? I just want an explanation why I'm not fighting for the belt this weekend.
Stop filming.
Come on, bro.
Stop filming.
I want an explanation.
Some people have left comments saying, well, nobody's forcing them to become MMA fighters. But if you've spent 10 or 15 years learning how to do it, and you've got a wife and kids to support, you can't just change careers out the blue. There was a time when I'd considered becoming a UFC fighter because I was a national champion boxer when I was a teenager. But I'm so glad that I never. The UFC has a monopoly on mixed martial arts, and whenever a rival promotion gets big enough, the UFC will buy them out to prevent the fighters from getting paid fairly. Dana has continually shut down attempts to form a union. The most notable instance was when UFC legend GSP banded together with a bunch of other fighters to try and get paid fairly, but it was smacked down and brought to a halt. One of the main investors when the UFC sold was Kobe Bryant, who'd done a Q&A and was asked this question by a brave UFC fighter.
How essential to your personal negotiations and the success of basketball in the world do you believe the NBA Players Association has been? We're on the verge of forming a union here, and so I was wondering...
Good question.
Not long after, she was cut from the UFC, even though she was on a 2-fight winning streak. Back when the UFC sold for $4 billion, a lot of the fighters were making $7,000 to show up and another $7,000 if they win. And on average, they fight about 3 times a year, so they're barely making minimum wage. And they also have to account for paying their coaches and medical bills, because in America, you don't get free healthcare. And let's not forget that they're getting punched in the head for a living, so the injuries are bound to happen. And a lot of the fighters will leave the sport in their mid-30s with a ton of brain damage and a bunch of other health problems. They have this knockout of the night bonus of $50,000, which is like a dangling carrot for the fighters. But really, only one fighter every show can win the bonus. There was an undefeated prospect called Bryce Mitchell who recently talked about how he was forced to fight even though he was injured because he couldn't afford to pay the bills for the next few months. He ended up losing that fight and his stock has dropped massively, and there's tons of other UFC fighters who've talked about having to fight while injured because they can't afford to take the time to recover. The UFC have just recently released their heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou because he was asking for healthcare and the ability to have independent sponsorships in his contract negotiations. There was a time when UFC fighters could have sponsors on their shorts to earn some money on the side, But Dana put a stop to that and made it so that all the fighters have to wear Reebok and hold Monster Energy cans at the end of the fight. And they get paid just a fraction of what they would have been in the past. And the rest of the money goes straight to Dana. If you speak out against Dana, he has so many different ways to punish you. Take, for example, UFC legend Nate Diaz. Nate had one fight left on his contract, and he made it clear that he wouldn't be signing a new contract because he was unhappy with the pay structure. As punishment, Dana matched them up with Khamzat Chimaev, one of the scariest fighters in the history of the UFC, who's in title contention, whereas Nate is, close to retirement and on the downslope of his career. The aim here was to inflict as much damage as possible on Nate, so that he wouldn't be able to bargain for better money with a different promotion. This is a reoccurring pattern in the UFC, where Dana will wait until a fighter has one fight left on the contract, and then he'll match them up as poorly as possible, so that he'll have more leverage in negotiations. Take, for example, Molly McCann, who was on a 2-fight knockout streak, and she had one fight left, right? So Dana matched her up with a grappler who was a heavy favourite, so that when they go into the negotiating table, she wouldn't be able to bargain for a better deal. The promotion at this point has just become a propaganda machine designed to elevate Dana White. You've got Dana White Looking for a Fight, which is his reality show. Then there's the Dana White Contender Series, where you audition to become a UFC fighter. Everything needs to have his name on it to feed his giant ego. He's just a massive ball of steroids who turns up to press conferences and barks at any reporter who has the balls to ask him a tough question. Ariel Helwani was the only reporter who was brave enough to hold him to account, and he got banned from UFC events, and then Dana tried to get him fired from ESPN. You can think of Dana as a mix between the Kingpin from the Spider-Man comics and Baron Harkonnen from the Dune movies. In 20 years' time, we're going to look back at Dana the same way we look at Don King.